What does it say about modern power when a single enlisted sailor, paid just over $12,000, can expose the inner workings of a US warship designed to project force across the Pacific? In San Diego this week, a federal judge sentenced a former US Navy engineer to more than 16 years in prison for selling sensitive naval manuals to someone working for Chinese intelligence. The sentence closes one case, but it opens a much larger question about how espionage now happens and why the stakes are higher than they appear. If this kind of breach accelerates, military deterrence erodes quietly, not through battlefield losses, but through leaked schematics and operational insight. If it fails to spread, it reinforces the credibility of counterintelligence deterrence. And if it sits somewhere in between, it suggests a world where great power competition is increasingly decided, far from public view, through personal vulnerabilities rather than grand strategy. The case centers on Jinchao Wei, a 25-year-old former petty officer second class assigned as an engineer aboard the USS Essex, an amphibious assault ship homeported in San Diego. On Monday, a federal judge sentenced him to 200 months in prison, roughly 16 and a half years, after a jury convicted him last August on 6 felony counts, including espionage. According to the Department of Justice, Wei received more than $12,000 in exchange for the information he passed on. In espionage terms, that sum is small. In strategic terms, the value of what he provided was far larger. The USS Essex is not an obscure platform. It is a Wasp-class amphibious assault ship capable of transporting and supporting more than 2,000 Marines, along with helicopters, tilt-rotor aircraft, and landing craft designed for expeditionary warfare. Ships like the Essex are central to US operations in the Indo-Pacific, where mobility, rapid deployment, and joint naval-marine integration matter as much as raw firepower. Any detailed understanding of how these vessels operate is valuable to a rival navy studying how to counter them. Over an 18-month period beginning in 2022, Wei transferred photographs, videos, and technical material related to the Essex and other US Navy assets. Prosecutors established that he shared information about ship movements, defensive systems, and internal operations. Most significantly, he sold approximately 60 technical and operating manuals, including documents covering weapons control systems, aircraft operations, and deck elevator mechanisms. These manuals carried export control warnings and were designed for internal military use, not public reference. The recruitment itself followed a familiar pattern. Wei was contacted through social media by someone presenting as a naval enthusiast associated with a Chinese state-owned shipbuilding corporation. The approach was informal, personal, and gradual. Evidence presented at trial showed that Wei privately expressed suspicion to a friend, acknowledging that the contact appeared linked to intelligence activity. Despite that awareness, he chose to continue. He moved the conversations to an encrypted messaging platform he believed offered greater security, signaling an understanding of the risks even as he proceeded. This detail matters because it reflects how modern espionage increasingly works. Recruitment no longer relies on dramatic defections or ideological alignment. It often exploits isolation, routine access, and digital familiarity. Wei later told the court that loneliness and introversion impaired his judgment. From a counterintelligence perspective, those personal factors are not incidental. They are structural vulnerabilities in large, technologically complex military organizations. Wei was not alone. He was one of 2 California-based sailors charged in August 2023 with providing sensitive military information to China. The second, Wenheng Zhao, received a sentence of more than 2 years in 2024 after pleading guilty to conspiracy and bribery-related offenses. Together, the cases illustrate a broader pattern rather than an isolated failure. US officials have repeatedly warned that Chinese intelligence services prioritize long-term access to technical data, even when individual pieces appear incremental. The historical context stretches back decades. Since the late 20th century, China has pursued a strategy of accelerating military modernization by acquiring foreign technology legally and illegally to shorten development cycles. In naval terms, this has included studying aircraft carrier operations, amphibious assault doctrine, and command and control integration. Each technical manual, each procedural insight reduces uncertainty and informs simulation, training, and system design. The timing of this case is particularly sensitive. The United States and China are engaged in an increasingly competitive relationship across the Indo-Pacific, from the South China Sea to Taiwan. Amphibious capabilities are central to both deterrence and escalation scenarios. Understanding how U.S. ships coordinate air, sea, and ground elements is not abstract knowledge. It shapes planning assumptions. What if similar breaches continue undetected? Over time, the cumulative effect would narrow the qualitative gap that underpins U.S. naval dominance. Even without copying systems directly, an adversary could design counters more efficiently, target vulnerabilities more precisely, and adjust doctrine with fewer unknowns. That does not trigger immediate crisis, but it quietly alters the balance. What if enforcement succeeds and deterrence hardens instead? Lengthy sentences like Wei's send a signal not just to potential insiders, but to foreign intelligence services evaluating cost and payoff. Increased scrutiny combined with improved personnel support and monitoring could raise the barrier to recruitment. In that scenario, espionage does not disappear, but it becomes more expensive and less predictable. The implications extend beyond East Asia. In South Asia, where India balances defense ties with the United States alongside strategic autonomy, perceptions of U.S. military security affect trust and cooperation. In the Middle East, where U.S. naval presence underpins maritime security, confidence in operational secrecy reassures partners dependent on American guarantees. Globally, alliances rely not only on hardware, but on confidence that sensitive integration details remain protected. Economically, the costs of espionage are difficult to quantify, but they are real. When operational concepts are compromised, systems require modification, procedures change, and training evolves. That imposes financial and logistical burdens. It also affects arms exports, where partners expect secure architectures and controlled knowledge transfer. Diplomatically, cases like this add friction to already strained relations. Each conviction reinforces narratives of strategic rivalry and mistrust. Even when framed as law enforcement matters, they influence negotiations, military dialogues, and crisis management mechanisms. Transparency becomes harder when suspicion deepens. At the individual level, the story is stark. A junior enlisted sailor, far from the centers of power, now faces nearly 2 decades in federal prison. His actions were not the result of battlefield pressure or ideological confrontation, but of everyday access and personal decisions. That contrast underscores how modern security challenges often emerge from the mundane rather than the dramatic.